Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us this evening for the third event in the Drawing the Line series. My name is Nikki Barber. I'm Vice President of Seattle Print Arts. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. Without the land, we would not have access to this conversation, and we thank the original caretakers who are still here. Join us in paying real rent, which goes to support the Duwamish Longhouse and cultural activities. If you are residing outside of Duwamish territory, we encourage you to research the land you are on and find ways to support First People. Links will be put into the chat for you. I'm thrilled to introduce our series discussion facilitator, Cleo Barnett, the Executive Director of Amplifier. Welcome, Cleo.
Hi, everyone. I hope you all are having a good evening tonight. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. We did this a few conversations back, but if you are tuning in live, please drop in the chat where you're dialing in from. It'd be good to see where y'all are at. Tann and Jude, thank you so much for being in conversation with us tonight. I just wanted to kick us off and start with the question of how long have you been tattooing for, and what can you share a little bit about the pathway for becoming a tattoo artist? And Tann, why don't we start with you?
So I've been tattooing for a little over a year now. I started right before I went into quarantine in New York City. I had picked it up like a month before that, so like late January, early February. I had picked it up, self-taught. I had my license already, so when I started practicing, I was already licensed. So I went through the the certification through New York City, and yeah, it was an interesting time to start during a pandemic. I mean, obviously, no one knew going into it like the extent. I mean, we're still living through it. But yeah, I've managed to like carve out like this career for myself doing this practice. So yeah, it's been about a year, and a part of the year has been, not practicing too. So yeah, that kind of that time, was like done doing mental work and trying to get through a pandemic. And I feel like it would help in the longer run my like tattooing career if I took that mental break and make sure I took care of myself. So yeah, it was interesting to have like half of that time be spent physically not tattooing. I hope that answered the full question.
Yeah, thank you. That is such a wild time to become a tattoo artist. Do you want to just share a little bit about why you chose tattooing?
Oh yeah. So I felt like through my Ink the Diaspora page that I could reach the audience, like help with like folks who are looking for like a tattoo artist in their area if I felt comfortable and knew of like a tattoo artist to refer. And it was great. And I mean, you obviously can meet like hundreds of people online and have many conversations with different people around the world. And that was happening. And it was insane. And I enjoyed it. And like the conversations really shaped in how I like moved and carried myself through, and like what I was offering through and what I am offering through Ink the Diaspora. And yeah, I think I just came to a point where I was like, I would like to, meet these people actually in person. So, the offering of a tattoo. And yeah, and so, that exchange of just like, oh yeah, these are the designs I have to offer whoever would, align with them and are interested in getting them hand poked. So yeah, it came about more so to start tattooing for myself was like, I had now an intention to do it, and that became more clear as like I kept interacting with folks through Ink the Diaspora. So yeah, I felt like I didn't start Ink the Diaspora and it was like, yeah, I'm gonna become a tattoo artist. This is so I can become a tattoo artist. I think I was asked that and I was like, no, I have no interest. Because why? There's a lot of cool folks out who are practicing that I can refer you to. So yeah, my intention just I didn't see it at first, and so I understood it as like, I interacted with more folks through the Diaspora, and I was like, oh, okay, this is something I can offer. And yeah, and it's kind of how it came about, is just realizing what my intention was going to be. And then I was like, yeah, I can do this, totally. I'll go get my license, sure. And yeah, and it's kind of where I'm at right now. And I have a space to do it at. And I have a great studio mate to share the space with. So yeah, that's where I'm at now with it.
That's so beautiful that like you're just following your intuition, and then that's just carving out this full new life for yourself. That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Jude, what about you? You've been doing this for a minute now. What was kind of your pathway?
I think I don't know the amount of time per se, but I feel Facebook reminds me of like, it'll show me that one photo that I posted like 11 years ago or so ago. It's like, you did this. And I was like, oh, I guess that's when I started tattooing. So it's like 12 years ago. My pathway to tattooing was more, I was going to art school up in Vancouver, BC in Canada. And I was focusing a lot on, I majored in drawing, and, I was doing illustrations, and later on kind of got really, I think it may also be the Vancouver art world that is very just white, male, old dominated, that I got kind of really bored and really quite exhausted with it. But I knew I still wanted to make art my career, and I started getting tattooed more and more. And at first I picked it up as like, oh, this is a way to make income, so I can put that income to like my other art practices. And then as soon as I started doing it, I was like, oh, actually, I really enjoy this. And through this, gave me a lot more freedom. I can travel. I can make my own hours, more or less. Yeah, so yeah, it kind of stuck, and then it just became like it became a career. And then after a career, I'm like, oh, okay, it became like activism. It became like, how do I suddenly have like a space? And how do we serve the community as artists or as tattoo artists? So I feel like it just kind of gradually kind of take its own course to grow.
Yeah, it's funny how life always seems to do that, where you're like, what's going on? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that all kind of makes sense and is the pathway. Well, that brings me to my next question about, can you speak to the power and importance of representation within the tattoo industry, and if that has been like a driver steering your direction at all?
Definitely. I was lucky to actually got to, my apprenticeship was not very formal. I worked as a studio manager for the studio up in Vancouver, but it's actually like one of the first women-owned tattoo shop. So already I picked that studio because of that. I approached many other studios, but also it was just like, I don't really like the vibe, people are mean. And even the ones that aren't mean, I'm like, the walls are black. I feel really suffocated. So when I found, it was Teresa at Electro Lady Lux. And so coming into that, like, I felt like it was kind of lucky because I already was in a space that they were more accepting of like me being queer. Everyone was white, but at least it was like a gateway of like, I found the little hole to get through. So later on, I started realizing it was like, oh, okay, like there's actually not a lot of queer tattooers, not a lot of comparable to like definitely how many white tattooers there are, especially in Canada. There's not a lot of POCs. And definitely important, because I feel like the people that were starting to come to me was definitely, it's like, oh, you're queer. Also, you're an AFAB person. I feel a lot more comfortable with you versus like, the one down the street with all cis men.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And Tann, what about you?
I think having representation through the industry, I mean, it's such because then you look at different tattooing practices. So kind of that oh, well, this is like an, style of art. So we'll take the example of the white cis man doing Japanese style artwork and, profiting off of that and having a very long career of recopying that imagery. So yeah, I see that representation as just why couldn't you take an apprentice who was Japanese and teach them and set them up so they can now have a style and be recognized as a Japanese artist and so I think in terms of that when it comes to representation in the tattoo industry. And I've also connected it to be well, I don't know if it's a new thing, but I say it's a trend because we're doing it through social media. So now all of a sudden it's just well, how do I tattoo black skin? And give me tips and the tricks to tattooing black skin. And I don't know, mostly having other black tattoo artists tattoo me, and the concept alone is just very strange. It's just why am I teaching? Again, we'll take this white man had a tattoo on my skin. It's just why wouldn't we just spread that knowledge so more black tattooers are now being birthed and given, space to flourish in this career. So my representation, seeing that representation, that's how I'm now speaking about representation now is, it's always oh, teach me. And it's just but why aren't we creating spaces where people, who look like one another can now create this imagery and flourish in this industry? That's my thought on it. I hope that's
No,
in
that's
line.
awesome. And I think both of you have done such an incredible job about really creating your own space. And I wonder if you can speak to sharing for anyone who doesn't know about the platform that you've built, Tam, sharing about what your platform and why you created that platform in the first place, and why it's been so important and so sacred.
Ink the Diaspora just started as merely a thought that I have of just why I wasn't seeing people with my skin tone with tattoos, but also I guess we can go into my style of tattoos. And there are, I mean, the tattoo industry is very segregated in terms of just when we associate and we think of a black tattoo artist in the mainstream tattoo, industry. When you say black tattoo artist, you resonated in what's that show? Or, Black Ink has now captivated my imagery of a black tattoo artist. So I was struggling to find, others who look like me within the tattoo industry. So that's how and why I create Ink the Diaspora. And it's just kind of this, or addressing this false narrative of oh, you're too dark to get a tattoo. And it's just, I kind of look at myself and I'm just well, no, I've never, come upon that. And also, I guess I also haven't opened myself up to many, tattoo situations where I'm going to a lot of shops. So I'm pretty sure if I had, I would have been told that, but I was able, to find more private tattooers. But I really wanted to have this conversation, this dialogue with people, because I just felt it was strange in the practice itself. And it's just why is no one talking? Well, then we can expand to body modification and that industry, and just of like only seeing white people embodying it, and just like, and it's just disturbing. It's just like, but then we go and see like tribes of like, you know, scarification, like other things like the stretched ears, and you know, and now it's just merely associated with like white and whiteness. And so yeah, I feel like Ink the Diaspora, because it's on a social, you know, network, the conversation always tied around it is, yeah, addressing things like colorism and racism that is, yeah, like how the industry, I don't know, is so successful because of these things. It's just like, you can take this industry as one of like an example, but you can also take that for a lot of other industries, you know. So yeah, to address like this colorism that's happening in the tattooing world, Ink the Diaspora like uses archiving, so like imagery, and showing a lot of photos of like people with dark skin with like nice tattoos, and then also the association of like just Black people getting or having bad tattoos, and them not being saying like, you know, artistically the same, like tattoo artists who tattoos more white people getting, you know, normal likes in the thousands, but when they tattoo their same artwork on a darker skin, you can see it gets significant less likes. So kind of that association that, oh, when it's on darker skin, it's, you know, people automatically downgrade it, and like kind of, you know, that imagery association. So a lot of that is colorism, and just like automatically people assuming just things on like a darker canvas is just not seen, you know, as like as beautiful, or yeah. So taking all that and putting this into, yeah, like a place where we can have these discussions and really challenge and make and inspire like other spaces to pop up, because I'm glad that I'm not the only one who's doing this work and who speak up about this stuff. But yeah, I think the Diaspora does have, you know, its place of like how it's contributing to this very long conversation. I feel like a lot of people are just trying to, because then it's always like, oh, this tattooer said this very racist thing, and it's just like, you know, like I don't want folks to be like waiting and anticipating like the next time it like jumps up, and it's just like, no, this is just a very real thing of just like these men and women just happen to have now Instagrams, but this is the same thing they preach and say to like clients and in their everyday life. So yeah, this conversation is very necessary and needed. And yeah, I always try to keep the Diaspora into that, making sure like that conversation and then plugging it in different ways. Because if I'm not like, you know, talking about tattoos, like we can talk about mutual aid, we can crowdfund and yeah, raise money for folks who like really need it, especially for, I mean, I always try to do trans, my trans like community. But yeah, there's, you know, so much we can do like with these like tattooing platforms that do affect like the tattooing, but also don't. I feel like a tattoo shop and a business is like a great community builder. Like I feel like that can bond a neighborhood. Like what? Like it is something. So I feel like with that, yeah, people who work in tattoo shops are definitely in the community and care about it. So yeah, with this platform, Ink the Diaspora, I try to, yeah, make sure it does help folks in the tattooing community, but also outside of it, and the people who collect them too, because that's just as important as the people who do tattoo. And I think, yeah, I always come at different angles with it, but yeah, it's myself of just like, yeah, I want to help tattooers, but I also want to help the people who get tattooed as well. So yeah.
your online community that you've created is so beautiful and so powerful.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Jude, you've created a community in a physical location, and what's that experience been like? Like, why have you wanted to create your own space, and how has it impacted your practice?
Thanks for sharing, Tann. That was so amazing. For me, I started Lilith Tattoo, honestly, from I was working elsewhere, and in the beginning, it was more like my own studio. I wanted to have more freedom, and pretty much calculating, like, let's say, financial stuff. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm actually paying a lot in commission that I don't need to be paying if I do the extra work. And then I finally got like a nice space, and then soon realized I can't just be the only one here because that's a lot of rent. And it's such a beautiful space. So I was like, wow, there's actually, like, before I started my shop, like, I think I was the first, Lilith may be the first queer shop, specific, and owned by a POC. So that's fucked up and also really cool. And the way that I think for me, the model of running the shop has been really, all artists are queer. And, there's definitely, like, anyone that's hired, you need to be committed to anti-oppression. You need to be committed to, being, an activist, like, in this space, definitely. And it's not perfect, but it's more like, okay, how do we make an experience for our client more body positive, more, how do they feel safe? How do they feel accepted? And also, because we have a lot of artists in the studio, like, what kind of clients do we not tolerate? Like, if we are sharing the space, like, how do we, it actually became like a, like an in-person platform of, like, with some authority, which, because it's our own space, it's like, it's a queer space. If someone's being transphobic, we can speak out because it's actually our space. And there's no, like, other shops, or, like, when I was working elsewhere where I'm like, oh wow, that was really problematic, but I couldn't really say anything because it wasn't my clients. Plus, also, the person who owns it doesn't have any idea that it's problematic. Another thing with it is that, like, how to create a model of, like, a shop that feels that as it's almost run like a nonprofit, but it's not, because we all just split the booth rent. There's, like, and we help pay for everything. Sure, I run it in, like, as in I own it, but the way that we split everything is pretty community oriented. And I, like, the shop doesn't make any profit from any artists that are working at all. So everything goes into a separate account, and when we need something, it comes out of that. And if there's not enough, there'll be a meeting. So it's always like that was more, I wanted that kind of it's not a collective, but it's more like a more branched out, everyone kind of managed, like, has their own freedom and also has a say on, like, oh, we actually need this, we don't need that. And also they get to be more financially responsible for themselves, and also make more financially, to that they can put their energy towards other things that they are interested in. Like, they'll do fundraisers because they don't have to pay a lot of rent. They're like, I can actually donate 2 days out of, this month to just work and everything goes to real rent. Everything goes to like the Asian Pacific, fundraiser. Like it's been a really amazing community hub for sure.
I'm just digesting that all. That is so inspiring. Been thinking about a lot of this in my own work, like nonprofit model versus workers cooperative, and how if you create your own business and like lay that foundation from the start, you can get so creative with how you set up the model in a way that's really empowering for everyone that's on the team. Jude, that's amazing. I didn't know that. It's so inspiring. Thank you. I was wondering if because you both kind of touched on this a little bit, but I wonder if you want to dig into the juicy question of like, what boundaries do you set with your clients around what you will or will not tattoo? And, seeing that this whole conversation is, drawing the line between appreciation and appropriation, is there a line for each of your practices?
I mean, mine is, I guess, brief of what I will and won't tattoo. If it's like a custom, to make sure it's like culturally significant to that person. And especially like a person of color, like I wouldn't have that conversation with a white person trying to get like, a Japanese inspired tattoo. It's like, yeah, no, on both ends. It's just like, no, I don't need to do that first off for you. And you should think about why you need to get that. But I think for like myself, like I definitely try to like have like my more marking and more like tribal designs like meant for other Black people or other people of color. So I mean, I draw the line on like kind of that of like who like I feel comfortable of like having that like visual marking done on them, because yeah, that shared space and what I created, it was like intended for another Black body to be on. So yeah, I mean, and then you can also see the intention of just like I put my flash on like shades of like brown. So I mean, and then it's not like how I would do like every design, but it's like for the most part of like my offerings so far have been that way. So yeah, I draw that line and making sure that I'm like tattooing those stuff like on like other Black bodies. So that's my definite like hard line. And yeah, I always try to make sure if that does happen, if it's like something culturally significant like design, I make sure it's something that's not going to be like it's not appropriative. But yeah, that's how I set my boundaries with my clients or potential clients.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for sharing those boundaries specifically. I feel like that's something that society seems to be working on more firmly these days, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Jude?
I have pretty similar ways of approaching it to Tann, for sure. I think for me, I separate like, okay, what are my personal boundaries? And there's actually appropriation boundaries where it's like, okay, I'm not going to do that because that's problematic, versus, which is, usually if someone asks for something that is not within, if, let's say, I get a request for a native design, I would ask them if they are Indigenous, and also, did they draw this, or, did someone that they know in the culture draw it, or themselves? Because it's, my rule is I am not Native. I can't draw Native art. If for some reason a Native person wants that tattooed on them, and wants to come to me because they can't find anyone else that would want to do that, I'm happy to be a technician for that. If that's their own art. So I kind of like remove my role as an artist, and be more like a craft person to like, oh, I want to give this to you. I want to support your journey in having this art on your body. And, you know, aside from that, there's like personal boundaries of things that I don't think will heal well, things that I don't think will, down to things I don't want to do. You know, where I'm like, there's a lot of artists, I don't need to be doing color. Someone else is more thrilled to do color work for you. Here's a reference for you to go see that person. But yeah, there's like the social boundaries and also like personal boundaries of, you know, how I kind of.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, I'm just so happy that you both are in a position to be able to be selective. That's really powerful. There was an audience question that Jude, I'm hoping you can answer because it speaks on what you're talking about with like technician versus artist. And when you are in that technician role, what's the research like for you when you're tattooing cultures that you're not personally a part of? Like, is there a research process in that at all?
There definitely is. And at the same time, because I'm the technician, I am the client. I feel like I put more responsibility on the client because I don't know the art they're bringing to me. Therefore, they can bring me a bunch and I would ask them like, is this, if I draw it this way, was, you know, does it, you know, does it make sense? But I can't be the judge of that because I don't know anything about that. So usually if someone wants something very specific, I would ask for it specifically and I would stencil that. You know, it's like, maybe you should, you know, if you're Samoan and you have all these Samoan family members that make art, maybe you want them to draw it for you. And then, you know, I can give them some guidelines on how it would fit on the body and I'll be the technician to put that on. But it's more, it's definitely giving the responsibility a lot more to the client than my usual, you know, work.
Thank you for that. That's super interesting. I'm curious, and Tann, I don't know about your practice enough to know this specific question. So do you see like a line between like your tattooing practice and then like a fine art practice? That was a question that someone from the audience asked. And I'm curious, because to me, I feel like tattooing is an art, like it is fine art. But I'm wondering if there's a difference for you.
So, I mean, my background is in fashion design. That's where I went to an art school. I went and majored and got my BFA in fashion design. And I was burnt out when I graduated. And yeah, it just left me just stuck in like not wanting to like address it until like I was in like the places and I was just like, oh, okay, like I can sit and make this sort of thing or accept this commission or this project. So I'm not sure if I have like a fine line. I'm not back to making clothes full time. I do it more so something I enjoy and for myself. So just like making stuff for myself or just like kind of gifting it like to friends if like I want to make them something just like as like a nice gift and not like tying sort of any, you know, restraint around it or just like it has to be perfect and it has to be this and that. And then to say that about like I'm making like a garment. I just want to make something like I would enjoy and like and take everything else out of it because of just like what school did to me and just like my association with creating and like making clothes. So yeah, I don't know if I have like a fine line between them. I guess it's like I'm in like the same mindset and if how like I approach and like what I'm creating for designs because I feel like my clothing designs are minimal in terms of like the patterns I make and the garment itself. When it's like actually on the body, it's kind of how it translates more and takes its shape in more of a form. And I feel like it's the same way with tattooing, where I can design something very minimal, but whoever's body it ends up being on, it kind of how it transforms and looks like how it's meant to. And I had like a client at last year, so at the beginning when I started to slowly come back into practicing tattooing again, in my own tattooing studio. She called it surfacing, and it just took the right tattooer, like so it's like always there, but it took like that right tattooer to bring it to the surface. So that's kind of like how like I see and feel my work translates. So yeah, like my intention can be like a very minimal thing, like literally just a dot in a line. But whoever body it ends up being on, it's like how it like really transforms and where it takes its like final like shape and how it's gonna be for the rest of like that person's life. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers like the fine line. Yeah, like I don't know, fashion design is fine art, but yeah, making clothes and tattooing is a art form. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's super interesting. And I'm gonna do some internet stalking and try to find some of your clothing because I can't wait to see it.
I had a website for a while. I'm gonna say good luck. I know I didn't take everything down, so you will in some corner of the universe. You might even find because I went to 2 colleges. The first college I went to for fashion design was not doing anything. Still in New York. I was just in upstate New York, and then I transferred down here in Brooklyn. I actually live across the street from my college I went to. Yeah, I mean off the same train stop, but yeah, there is a video from my earlier years in college, fashion, like modeling for the school's like end of the year fashion show. Yeah, so you might find something. I hope you do.
Thanks, Tann.
Thank you.
And what about you, Jude? Because you were saying you were like on this pathway to fine art, and you're a lot of people who are tuning in tonight are printmakers and coming from a printmaking background. So was there a time when you're like, no, I just want to go hard in tattooing, or do you see yourself kind of working in both spaces? And then like a follow-up question to that is, do you see a link at all between like tattooing and fine art?
It's a very interesting question. Yeah, as an art school student, when I started tattooing more, I'm like, oh, then I became like a craft person, because there's always like, is it craft? Is it art? Who the hell cares? It doesn't matter. That's also what their art school tried to teach you. But I think for me, I transitioned, like I was an illustrator and I also did installation. And the thing was, interestingly, now that I think about it, it all kind of became all together, because I always did really intricate drawings on non-archival things. And that was kind of like my fine art, where I don't want it to last. Like that I don't, it's like, it's this meticulous thing, but it's on something that's not gonna last. And I kind of bring that into my tattooing because it seems so permanent. But in a way, I'm like, it's only permanent till you die. And the thing is, like, there's something. When I started off, it was definitely like, I'm making a drawing, I'm putting it on a person, in a stencil, I'm tracing. This is an illustration on a body. And after a while, I got kind of burnt out with that, where I was like, okay, well, now I don't want to draw for myself. Like, I'm just designing for people, and I don't want to draw for myself because I'm drawing so much, and I'm also drawing again on the body. So I was like, then this is going to be my art, I need to make tattooing my fine art. Like, there can't be a differentiation anymore. So that's how I started freehanding. So I just like scrapped all the prep work, where I was like, okay, this feels more like a sketch. Sure, I have some themes, but like I'm more in the moment of like, this is the person's body at this real time. How do I make it flow with this person's body at this time. So there's like, for myself, other people don't have to know. I feel like that's my fine art practice in that. And like, you know, brings in like mindfulness and like being in the moment and things like that, that I feel like feeds my soul, you know, and yeah, and also speaks to like the moment, speaks to like present, speaks to also as soon as people walk out the door, like I don't know what's going to happen to it. So I kind of still have that like letting go, you know, that I had with like my other art pieces that I used to do when I was illustrating and doing installation. So yeah, so I think I like kind of erased the boundary of it for me, where I was like, I need to make, if this is going to be sustainable for me, tattooing needs to be my fine art, because I don't have enough energy to do fine art and tattooing as art form.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. My mind's racing in a few different directions, but this conversation is not about me. So I'll keep it to the next question of, and you both just touched on this a little bit too, of the link between cultural appropriation and fashion trends within tattoo aesthetics. I don't know, and anyone jump in if you have anything to say about this.
Sorry, I was getting new headphones. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, the link between like cultural appropriation and like current fashion trends, and then how that fits within tattoo aesthetics.
I mean, I haven't been following, but I mean, the grounding ones, like I feel like I guess like it's still in trend-ish, but like I guess like more hood tattoos and face tattoos. So or even I guess they are like highly inspired by like gel tattoos. So that kind of like aesthetic, how that's like on the rise of just like, I don't know, like any would be like male model, like skinny white guy with like a bunch of face tattoos, like, you know, getting like modeling contracts and being called edgy, but like a Black man walking down the street can still be perceived as like the aggressive, like the thug, and, you know, questioned about like just private class and just like everything about him because of his face tattoos. Or I would say about like I saw it like a Black woman getting like this, like a tattoo on the side of her face in the comments, was like, oh, like about the jobs, like, oh, what jobs are you gonna get? So like always that association of like what things are now limited because of like a certain like tattoo you have and choose to get, versus like how it's now being popularized on certain people. And yeah, and it's a certain body and type, and yeah, it's certainly, yeah, getting a lot more of like an artistic you know, like glorification than it is for like you know, someone who got their face tattoo in jail, and, you know, it's not necessarily like their fashion aesthetic. It was like a moment in their life and time. And yeah, that's kind of like what I'm seeing, or like I constantly still see. I'm not sure if there's of any other ones. If like Jude, if you've seen, I'm like, I can't really recall others.
Yeah, I totally see the ones that you're talking about for sure, because that, like Post Malone, I'm just like,
oh right,
man. Yeah, definitely. But I think for me, I was more aware of like when all the quote, ignorant tattoos were coming about.
There you go.
But yeah, I think like what's interesting for me is like, okay, cultural appropriation, their culture just covers so much. because it's like there's race in culture, there's also class, there's also like certain demographics, you know, queer culture, culture, you know, so I feel like there's definitely like, you know, trends that are from, you know, while in the 90s it was tribal for people, white people that wants to have a tribe but actually doesn't have a tribe, so they have to, you know, mimic that. But also, like, I think for me now, I'm thinking more of with my generation, it's more also on class appropriation, and that also of course intersects with race, with what you're talking about, Tann, with like you know, hood tattoos and that aesthetic. Nowadays it's like, oh, people, there's a generation that's like, I want my tattoos to look ironic and kind of bad, you know, which I'm like, everyone has it's your own body, you decide whatever. And at the same time it's like, oh, that's interesting, like, you're white, you're also privileged, I definitely know you're a trust fund kid, but you want to take on a certain class aesthetic of like very impoverished people to make yourself look dirty because that's edgy. And that's as a POC, and I've talked about this with a lot of my other POC friends, and I feel like they have kind of the same, like, yeah, that doesn't really sit well for us. You know, it's just like, that's kind of like a little problematic. However, I see that like rise in like that, you know, aesthetic, and there's also something to be said because it's like, oh, it's kind of like punk, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, edgy and like rebellious to get bad tattoos. So that's a trend I see, at least. I don't have like a definite like kind of conclusion to that, but that, I feel like that's what I've been seeing in the past, you know, 5-6 years. Yeah.
Well, and I think what's so powerful about both of your works is you're like, okay, I'm just going to create my own space. I'm going to do this on my own terms, and I'm going to make this work for the communities that I'm in. And so just creating those new pathways. I'm wondering if either of you like identify with ritual in your work at all. I know that Jude, you are, you know, I don't know, it seems like it's like you're very intentional when you are working with someone, and like what, and even Tanner, you're talking about, you know, how it's like you're bringing these marks to the surface, but it really comes to life on someone's body. Can you talk at all to like if there's any like preparation that you do with yourself before the work, or if you see this work as any sort of kind of like ritual?
Oh yeah, I do have like a ritual before I like leave out for like my tattoo appointments, just for myself and preparing, especially when I take transit, and just like already feeling overwhelmed before I get on the train, and like calming myself down and grounding myself, because I know, and then also giving myself time for when I get there, that I have like, you know, my time to just like set into it. Yeah, I have like a certain oil that I use, and like an affirmation that I tell myself before I leave out the door. And then also just like setting up my actual space, and well, I'm not space, like my setup, like on my glass table, like my working area, and like how I just wipe down and clean. And yeah, just like walking through like each step of like setting up of what I need for that client. And I also offer to clients just like kind of like a ritual spray if they're feeling like really anxious, and just like really worked up about getting a tattoo. And I see a lot of clients where I'm giving them their first hand poke tattoo, and so we're breaking down a lot of barriers of just like kind of, a lot of the time it's just like stuff that they already heard about, of like getting hand poke tattoo. And a lot of assumptions and a lot of times, I don't know, like a lot of misinformation about it. Just like it hurts so much more painful. I'm just like, how is it more painful versus a machine and a hot needle? But yeah, so yeah, they always assume that it hurts more. So yeah, I do offer them like a ritual spray to kind of just like calm themselves down before we start. I mean, if like the client wants it, it's not, if I see them having, a discomfort, I'll offer it. But yeah, it's like simple, like little rituals I can put myself into in order to kind of give this exchange. I feel like in the actual process, and as like I'm working, the repetitiveness is like its own ritual for me on the body. I do like repetitiveness. So like sewing, I learned how to hand sew before, like I learned and picked up like a machine and learned, later an industrial machine in college and stuff. So working with my hands has always been like, my go-to for everything. So kind of being in that like position and like working, that itself is very like a ritual, and like I'm performing over the body. And yeah, like that time, it's like you're very close, and like I don't know, I just feel and like I'm very much in tune to like literally every single poke that I'm doing. So yeah, it definitely creates like this kind of other space like around us, and like whether the client wants to talk or they want to be more in silence, or they want to listen to their own music, we're still creating a space between us, even if we're like sharing next to another like two other people. Yeah, is what I want to share of a ritual. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think for me, I definitely see tattooing as a ritual in and of itself in general. And I, like Tann, I also have my morning rituals for when, and it actually was able to like really hone it down during the pandemic because I had so much free time, and I was like, okay, I need to make this a habit before I start going into work so I feel more grounded. But I think for me, the ritual comes more like forefront when I'm dealing with clients that are coming specifically for scar cover-ups, for something that has something a lot of things that has to do with healing and trauma. I feel like the session would become a little more ritualized for me, how I walk them through a certain thing, how like I will hold the space for them to share or to just, how do I hold a container for that becomes more ritualized for sure. Day to day, I feel like the ritual is like, yeah, like Tann says, it is in the tattooing. Whether you like it or not, I feel like if you're so close to someone, I can breathe their sweat. Like I actually smell what they smell like. There's definitely an exchange. There's definitely an energetic exchange. If the amount of pressure I put on their body, whether that calms them down, because it grounds them more, or the feeling of the needle, like everything becomes a little more in itself a ritual. And I don't really have like a marker of like, oh, let's do this and then let's do that. But I do know friends that have they'll do 5 breaths with like a client before they begin, which I actually think is really amazing. And I may adopt that also, just to kind of get everybody ready. But I see it as an art form that is ritualistic in and of its nature.
Thanks so much for sharing. And I feel like a big part of even just this conversation of cultural appropriation is folks getting more in touch with like their body and their positionality, and just really appreciate the intentionality you both bring to your practice. The world just needs so much more of that. So I know we're just have a couple more minutes here, so I was hoping that we could just close up with asking each of you, how can we support your work? And is there anything that's coming up in the pipelines that we should be looking out for either one of you?
I was gonna say if Jude wanted to go first. Thanks. I guess in the pipeline of things, me and my current studio mate are trying to expand in space and not necessarily look for like a third person to split our time, but to open our space well to something bigger, but to also add like a station where we can be more intentional about how we can share like the information of tattooing and help more inspiring Black tattooers start, and how to not necessarily offer an apprenticeship, but just encouragement to like to tell them like, hey, you can be self-taught and have like a career in this industry, and to see what that can look like for them. So we are getting ourselves together to look for a larger space to occupy out of, especially as like our clientele and personal business grow. And yeah, and opening our space to now start teaching and like have this be more of like a community effort of like how we can inspire more Black tattooers to start in this industry. I mean, I would always love to see more Black trans tattooers start in this industry, but I feel like we need to start somewhere, and yeah, giving out this information is super important to us. And yeah, it should be something that they have access to and should learn about. And it shouldn't ever felt like it's being kept, and it's just like, well, how do I do it? And it's just like, yeah, I hope to relieve a lot of that for like a Black person or just like another person of color thinking about that. Like, I hope it, it becomes less of like that barrier or like hurdles. It's just like, well, I even know how to start. Like I can even, and it's just like, oh no, I can, like, I could see it. I can like see other folks who can, yeah. So we're trying to tackle that and move into a bigger space and yeah, invite more folks to start practicing, and but then to offer them a safe place where they can do it, especially as we I mean, we're still living through the pandemic, so I mean, things can still change. I feel like the tattoo industry is not going to go back to how it was. I mean, I feel like a lot of things has changed because of the pandemic, and I feel like those changes are going to stick. So I'm thinking in the terms of like moving forward, and how things are, because maybe they don't make it more strict for people to get like a tattooing license. If New York changes some things, I feel like they should change some things about a clause about tattoo artists literally lying and saying you're too dark to get a tattoo, where it's just like, there is no way you are a license holding tattoo artist saying that to a client. Like, so for me, I feel like, yeah, a lot of things need to change in that way. But yeah, in the long haul, we're trying to expand into space and to see like actual Black people take space and start like tattooing collectives in New York that aren't just like white, or I see mostly white queer people form spaces. And yeah, especially, I mean, gentrifiers, they're gentrifiers. It's like, I'm working with someone who's a New York native, and we're struggling to find people who will rent to us, because now it's just like, oh, what's your credit and stuff like that. So we're struggling trying to find space to rent. And yeah, and like a predominantly, and we're trying to do like a Black neighborhood, so not going out far into other parts of Brooklyn where it is majority like white neighborhoods, and like yeah, we are choosing and we want to be around other Black people, because that's going to be a significant, that's where our clientele is, like that's where our clients are coming from. Yeah, I mean, I always have things other than tattooing, or personally, like, well, I'm booking tattooing appointments still, but I have like merch and the other panels I've curated through Ink the Diaspora that is live and always available on my, well, it's Linktree, but like all my links through Instagram and my website. But yeah, we are also, I guess I left that part out, but like the using crowdfunding to find a space and to afford it is what me and my studio mate are planning for in the near future, so we can be set up and, you know, in like a safe spot for us, and it's like easy to like access and travel to, because right now the space we're at is like a little far, so it does displace us and puts us in a very white othered it's like an artist community, but it's very older white male, and we do not fit in there. So yeah, we're trying to get out of that situation, and also out of like a predominantly white neighborhood that's gentrified. So yeah, we're just trying to be in like a safer, better place. That's also easier for our clients to have like access to us and like to get to. But yeah, so we will be doing like public funding to help us get to that.
Thank you. We'll
Thank
definitely,
you.
Nikki just popped your Instagram in the chat, so everyone
Oh, okay, thank you.
follow Tann and keep an eye out for the crowdfunding campaign and drop some dollars in there so they can get a magical space.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Jude, how about you as we wrap this up tonight?
Well, right now we've been in a process of I never thought we would have 8 artists, you know, or be able to house 8 artists, but we're looking to expand also. I think that'll be towards the end of the year if we find a good space enough. So we may be moving our studio probably up to the hill, Capitol Hill. But also the reason we're expanding is to have you know, more there's some problems with the old space, but we love it for now. But that we'd be able to host more guest artists, you know, thinking of when it's safe again. And also to have actually a gallery space that we're able to do community programs, or it's kind of like a flex space, because I feel like the studio, all of the artists in the studio has like such a big connection to like nature-based and like land-based practices that it's my vision to bring in, like, let's say like we can have classes on like, you know, herbs and things that are like at the end of the night, you know, where will be for, you know, the community, and also a gallery space that showcases up and coming artists, you know, plus maybe a small storefront just to host and partner with BIPOC businesses and crafts people. Right now we have Black Origins Plants has used our storefront to put all her plants, and, you know, all proceeds go to her, but it also helps like decorate our space and makes it so lush and beautiful. So that kind of more cross community building and like business would be more possible in the new space. That's the dream. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, awesome. And is it something that you're going to be crowdfunding for? Is it more just getting access to space?
It's more just getting an access to the space, and within our budget.
Okay, well,
That's
let's
the-
connect because I know of a space in Seattle that I think could be really amazing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, you two. Nikki, I don't know if you want to pop in to do the closing remarks, but I know that we're at time. So thanks so much for tuning in tonight, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Jude, Tann, and Cleo, and everyone in the audience. Please join us, SPA, Seattle Printers, for a discussion group next Wednesday. Be hosted by Suki Patel, Amber Kyotza, and myself, Nikki Barber. We'll email you all the information that you need tomorrow. And also would so love for you guys to join us for our final fourth webinar, June 2nd. Cleo will be in dialogue with Nisha Sethi and Moni Chow. So thanks, you guys. It's been lovely.